There's no one in there, and there's no possibility of having anyone in there.
I love that. I love that appreciation. So, how did a theoretical physicist by training get so interested in life and consciousness?
Yeah, well, I think I've always had an interest in it, even when I was a young man. I just like life. I was always philosophically inclined, right? And I started off when I was young with a profound interest in science. And I started off as a Platonist, like many theoretically inclined, people do. I was like, oh, there are these, eternal laws of nature, and if I could just know them, I'd know everything there was to know about the universe. But as time went on, I became actually very dissatisfied with that. And then when I was in college, I took an existentialism class where I was introduced to the philosophy known as phenomenology, which really takes experience, raw, direct experience as its subject. And I really saw from that these reductionist accounts, which try and like talk about human experience, talk about life as if it was just a machine, as if it was just all mechanisms, was actually
Right.
completely blind. Like it literally could not see the problem of experience. And its descriptions, its so-called explanations of the interiority, if that's the right, I'm not even pronouncing that correctly, of experience was just an illusion. That, what it was really doing, it was sweeping the problem under the rug. The clearest problem to us, which is that we're awake and aware and we're in this world, it wants to tell us, oh, that's not really a problem. That doesn't even exist. The word is an epiphenomena. It's telling us
Yes.
that, like, oh, all that exists are protons and electrons, etc., the particles of the standard model, and everything else, like experience, is just an illusion, an epiphenomena of those particles. And I was like, that is a dumb, way, because it's the most direct. It's what's most intimate to us. It is the original problem. And then to try and like save your philosophy by telling me that this thing that is the most important problem is an illusion, I just started to think this is a bad way of going about things.
Right. I agree. Why do you think that is? Why has science sort of left subjective experience behind?
Well, as we said in our book, The Blind Spot, there was I was responsible for writing the chapter about how we got here, right? Which is where I was sort of it was a fascinating chapter to write. I was running through, sort of from the Greek era to the dawn of modern science, to like sort of Galileo and all the sort of pieces that had to evolve in order for us to formulate modern. So by modern, I mean, what started with Galileo. And the subsection I called it was of that part was, well, it made sense at the time, right?
Right.
Because in order to have science, it was important to try to filter out the subjective parts of experience, right? If you wanted to have as we talk about in the book, if you wanted to have a theory of thermodynamics, you needed a science of thermometry. You needed to be able to somehow standardize the experience of hot and cold, right? So experience starts with like, ooh, I'm freezing, or oh, I need more clothes, I should take clothes off because it's so hot. You needed some way to make that, to extract from that what what the philosopher Michel Bitbol calls the structural invariance of experience. So that's how we ended up with thermometers, right? Thermometers were a way of like, you got a little mercury in a tube, and if I dip it in this water, which most of us feel is cold, rises to this level. So in order to build science, we first had to figure out a way of pushing subjective experience to the side and
Right.
find those structural invariants. So it totally made sense. But then what happened is we forgot, what we call the amnesia of experience. We forgot that, centigrade, degrees centigrade or degrees Fahrenheit, those don't exist in the world, right? Like our world, like the only world we have is the world of experience. And that we start thinking that degrees centigrade are more real than the experience of hot and cold. We've done what uh, the guy who's founded phenomenology, Husserl, called the surreptitious substitution. Without thinking about it, we substituted degrees Celsius for the actual bodily experience of hot and cold, and we thought the degrees were real and hot and cold. Oh no, those aren't. And that's how we got ourselves. And then we ended up. You keep going down that road, and then you end up with paradox after paradox. And that's what the book was really about, was showing all what we call the blind spot, all the paradoxes that come when you forget experience.
Yeah. Yeah, we're going to get into those paradoxes as well. Something I did that I think you might be interested in is I did a process called descriptive experience sampling. Have you heard of this?
No, no.
So I spent 10 weeks carrying around this box. I don't have it on me, unfortunately. This box that was made in the 1970s by this psychologist called Dr. Russell Hurlburt. And basically, it will beep you at random times in the day, and your job is to write down your inner experience.
That's
So,
great.
were you inner speaking? If you were, what words were you speaking in your head? Did you have any images in your mind? If you were, what exactly were those images? Like, what exactly was your experience? And I did this for 10 weeks as part of a podcast that's coming out in a couple of weeks. I'm really excited to release that. And for one, it's really hard. We really do not know our inner experience at
Yeah,
all. I
right.
made a bunch of predictions going in that were all basically wrong. Like I was like, I inner speak all the time. I'm always debating influential figures in my head. I have
In
this
your head, yeah, right.
crazy imagination of who I'm like thinking about all the time. None of that is true, really.
Wow.
Most of my experience is very bodily. Anyway, like it's just it's really interesting. I find that we really just don't understand our inner experience. We live in such a distracted world that anytime we're just left idle, which is what is required to really think inwards and get in the introspection, we're on, X or TikTok or social media or anything else. Have you interrogated your own inner experience, your own subjectivity at all?
Yeah, quite a bit actually. I've been staring at a wall for 30 freaking years as a contemplative doing Zen contemplative practice, right? I started
Right.
about 30 or 40 years ago
Cool.
doing, and I want to distinguish between mindfulness meditation and contemplative practice because mindfulness is sort of like the starter, right? It's where, your mindfulness is like the bunny hill of, whereas
Yeah.
contemplative practice is where you're doing it for hours, right? Under the guidance of a teacher. And yeah, I mean that, sitting doing 20. So I just came back from one where for like 3 days it was 24-minute rounds of contemplative practice separated by 5-minute rounds of what's called kinhin, where you walk just to, you got to get up and move. And you do that for like, you get up at 5 a.m., you do that for 2 hours, and then you do lunch, and then there's like a work period. And then like in the late morning from 10 to 12:30, you do it again. And then from 3 o'clock to 5:30, you do it again. And from like 7 until 9. That's a lot of time just spent
Right.
really interrogating or being present with, the whole body. Because it's not just the mind, as you said. What you find is actually, it's very much a body, a very
Yes.
somatic experience. And I kind of, my hot take on this, which, if I love poking philosophers of mind, I want to say that you should not be able to do the philosophy of mind unless you've done a Zen or some kind of a meditation intensive, because that's when you really get to see what your mind is. It's not this rational discourse. It is,
Yes.
as you said, there's on one hand, there's inner dialogues of, oh, that guy with his shoes, why is he wearing that? Or, oh, my butt hurts. Or it's just this constant stream. And you can't, only when you start to do prolonged contemplative practice is you see there's an ocean underneath that. Underneath that roof
Yeah.
brain chatter is an ocean of depth to what happens in experience. And you don't see that unless you do the work.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. There's so much armchair philosophizing on people who think they can basically introspect the entire, breadth of human consciousness if they just tried hard enough. I guarantee anyone who says that has not tried to do that ever, because it is really hard. Like
Right.
one of Dr. Hurlbert's findings is that people will go to him saying, I inner speak all the time. I am 100% confident that my inner monologue is constantly going. And then he's had cases that he basically broke the internet like 10 years ago, where this one case, after 10 weeks of doing this, there was not a single experience sample of inner monologue. And it like literally shifted this person's reality. Like in the most
Right.
literal sense, this person went from thinking this was a core part of their experience to, God damn it, I actually don't do that at all. And that's
Right.
because there is
Right.
actually a difference between inner speaking and thinking. And then when we kind of
Right.
retrospect about thinking, we thought it was in words, but that's sort of just created in the retrospective process.
Right.
So I
Right.
very much appreciate this importance of subjective phenomenology.
Yeah, and so that's why I think really where much of sort of the debate about consciousness and experience, like I don't even like to use the word consciousness because it gets reified, right? It gets turned into a thing, as
Yeah.
if like, oh look, I have a box with 8 units of consciousness in here. so consciousness, because of the history of the debate, we think of it as a thing or a particular kind of process or an algorithm, where if you focus on experience, what you see is from the phenomenological point of view, from the point of view of the philosophy called phenomenology, or it's the parts of the classic philosophy of India and Asia which are relevant to this. What you find is that it's not really experience is something that's much more fluid. It's much more horizontal. I really like that word,
Yes.
horizontal, in the sense that there's, with the horizon, when you walk around, you're always the center and the horizon moves with you. Like your horizon is always moving with you.
Yes. Right.
There's a horizontal structure to consciousness or experience. And so, yeah, I think like so much of the popular discussion about this happens in what's called the Anglo-American tradition, the analytic tradition. Which is very kind of like mimicking science, attempting to use logic and, kind of formal systems approach to thinking about experience. And I think that is, it's you'll never hear people talking about phenomenology, right? I mean, it's like,
Yeah.
here's this philosophical movement that was hugely influential in Europe. And it's like, that doesn't even exist. Like in my field, when we talk about the philosophy of science, it's as if Merleau-Ponty, was a towering figure in continental philosophy. Like, oh no, nobody even knows who he is. And it just shows sort of the unwillingness to address the experience of being a subject. Like, let's not even call it subjectivity. The experience of being an agent, of an autonomous agent. It's just like, no, we're not even going to admit that into our discussions.
Yeah, it's strange to me. I completely understand your argument that it made sense at one point in history, but like still today in 2025, it's like, why are we not funding more research in this area? Like firsthand subjective experience. I mean, what could possibly be more important to topics
Right.
like mental health, to, drug safety? There's so much work you could do on that, like what the hell is actually happening on a subjective level on terms of drugs, and not, there's so many different areas that would benefit from this, but there's
AI.
still an apprehension.
Think about
Yeah.
AI. I mean, like,
Yeah.
all this talk about super intelligence, you look at what an LLM is, the version of artificial intelligence we have, which are these large language models, which they're not even in the ballpark. They're not even in the right, they're in the
Yeah.
wrong field to even think about super intelligence or any kind of sentience or anything. There's no one in there, and there's no possibility of having anyone in there. And yet you see these discussions about like, oh, when these things wake up and take over. And so the entire, there is a huge danger with AI, but it's not that. It's not Skynet waking up and launching all the nuclear missiles because it hates us, right? And so there you see a place where like, wow, if we actually had some handle on the centrality of experience, then our discussions about AI would be entirely different. So yeah, no, it made sense at the time. It allowed science to make progress in a certain way. But by the beginning of the 19th or the 20th century, it was already becoming clear the flaws in this. There were philosophers and physicists and scientists who had already recognized this. But most importantly to me, along came quantum mechanics, right? And from the get-go, quantum mechanics, the founders of quantum mechanics, recognized that measurement was a central problem. That measurement, you couldn't talk about quantum systems, which were the most significant development in physics, or almost the most significant development, along with relativity, in physics. That measurement was central to it, and then you see like 70 years of people trying to pretend that measurement is not. And so then you get things to me that are absurd, like the many worlds interpretation, where like, oh, in order to get measurement out of the problem, we're going to imagine that there's an infinite number of unobservable ghost universes. That's our solution to the quantum measurement problem, which to me is just like running, your pants are on fire and you're just running as fast as you can away from what you think is the problem, and the problem is you. So that's I think a really interesting way of seeing sort of I think what it is, the beauty, all of us as physicists come to physics because we want to read God's mind, right? That's the promise. We're told that as physicists, we will be able to like hear God's thoughts. And so nobody wants to give that up, right? That idea that you're going to get a perfect objective frame, that you're going to,
Right.
have God's eye view of the universe. That is so seductive. It's why I went into the field. And then the alternative seems like, oh, now it's just humans, and we suck, and our sucky human view. But what they don't realize is actually you get even when you come to recognize the primacy of experience, now a whole new range of scientific questions arise that are
Right.
just as profound, just as interesting, just as deep as the old sort of God's eye view that you're going to have to let go of.
Yeah. This AI leader trend that you mentioned has become almost terrifying in the last couple of weeks. I feel like these really prominent leaders that are have a very influential voice almost every week now are coming out and saying that these LLMs are starting to introspect, starting to have elements of consciousness. And they're clearly conflating intelligence, their definition of intelligence, with consciousness. And like
Right.
I think it's okay to say that they are intelligent. Some people will agree, some people will disagree with that. But that's not remotely the same thing as consciousness. You can't just conflate those things, or experience. You can, and then I saw Geoffrey Hinton talk about it recently. I saw Stephen Wolfram, Dario, Amodei is the CEO of Anthropic. Like, all of these guys are kind of peddling this thought that LLMs are going to emerge, and I wonder how much of it is like investor hype farming and, like, kind of raising the suspense and the intrigue around this technology, and does it make the AI, which the whole AI trend, just hype if it's maybe conscious? And I was speaking to a Johannes Kleiner, who's a mathematical consciousness researcher. He really knows his stuff about the maths underpinning
Mm-hmm.
consciousness. He made a very good point, which is like, well, these guys aren't actually funding any money towards consciousness researchers because they don't want an answer to this question. They want the ambiguity. They want the
Yeah.
kind of they want the murky middle ground where all of the potential exists, where all of the investors are frothing at the mouth of the potential, but they're not actually funding any work to figure out, like, in what sense maybe possibly are LLMs or other types of AI conscious. They just want to kind of spin the story mill, and I don't know. I think that's probably just not a good thing for them to be doing when they're so influential.
Well, I agree. And when I see people, I'm sometimes stunned by Hinton's comments. It's like,
Yeah,
you should know better. Like, really,
yeah,
like, there's a degree of philosophical naivete there that's like, did you take any courses? Or did you only take courses in, like, the version of philosophies of consciousness that, neatly fit with your very narrow views? It's like kind of stunning that he doesn't seem
yeah,
to have any kind of self-awareness of the profound limitation of his views. And about the
yeah,
hype, I mean, you can never speak to somebody's motivation, but the hype train is amazing. And what's really amazing is how the hype train is ramping up as it's becoming clear that it's hype, right?
yeah,
So,
yeah,
ChatGPT 5, right? It wasn't even close to what anybody thought it was going to be.
yeah,
The vibe coding. Everyone's like, vibe coding, oh my God, anybody's going to be able to. The number of people who are using vibe coding now is plummeting. It's like
yes,
so many ways the promise of this version of AI, which are these LLMs, it's becoming so clear that this is not at all what you promised us. It's
yes,
amazing. I mean, I use it all the time. It's an amazing piece of technology, but
yes,
its stupidity becomes very clear. And so you're seeing, for example, very interesting study recently done that showed that 90% of companies are investing in AI. No companies are seeing productivity gains because all this idea of AI slop, right?
yeah,
That it's becomes very clear that actually within 5 years or whatever, the internet is going to become unusable because AIs always hallucinate. You know,
yeah, yeah,
20% or whatever the number is of what comes out of your query in an AI is wrong. It's just, pardon my language, bullshit. And actually,
yeah,
philosophically is the right term. It sounds good, but it's bullshit. And so, yeah, I think the hype is almost amping up as it becomes clear that this amazing thing you built is nowhere close to any of the promises that you made about it. And so, of course, if we
yeah,
admit that, then, this is something I'm seeing happening now too. People are recognizing the degree of the economic bubble that AI, like, some giant fraction of the US economy of the stock market
right.
is AI. And once people recognize that there's no actual profit to come out of this, then it could be really the significant. I'm saying, as a guy who wants to retire someday.
The Giant Shoulder mission is to explore radical ideas in biology, neuroscience, and consciousness, and elevate those stories to the highest possible level while keeping them accessible to everyone. If this interests you and you want to support independent science, then please consider subscribing to the Clips channel